Folks, over the past several videos, we have talked about third-party influences, the adult children, the meddling parents, and the exes that impede our relationships. Today, I want to talk about something far more uncomfortable and far more self-convicting. Today, I want to talk about the first party influence. That first party influence is the war within ourselves. Right now, as we speak, the world is watching war unfold across our nation. I am deeply saddened by what is going on in our world today. But on this day, I'm going to talk about a different type of war. A war many people are fighting every single day. Because the truth is this, folks. Many people are their own worst enemy, which has everything to do with all the calamities, the atrocities, the casualties, and the collateral damage that you see unfolding right before our very eyes in this world today. The conflicts we see playing out across nations are often the same conflicts playing out in our relationships. Because healthy relationships begin with us and end with us. Sadly, the biggest saboteur we oftentimes face is ourselves. I know personally, for me, it was me against me my entire life. Though no one ever told me. It was World War me. Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and financially. And that war within me didn't begin in adulthood. For many people, the seeds of this internal war were planted in us from childhood. Our self-esteem and self-worth were shaped by where we were born, the homes we grew up in, our family dynamics, the schools that taught us, and the neighborhoods in which we navigated. Whether you came from a gated community or from the projects in the hood, you could still be fighting the same internal battle, because the battlefield of the mind does not recognize zip codes. Folks, some people grow up with financial security, but emotional neglect. Others grow up with very little materially, but with a great deal of strength, discipline, and love in the home. The environments may look different on the outside, but the war within the mind can still be very real in both situations. Because the mind begins forming very early. The messages we hear, the examples we see, the environments we experience. Those things begin shaping how we think about ourselves and how we see the world. And if those early messages are unhealthy, they can follow us right into adulthood, where we begin fighting battles in our own mind long after childhood has ended. Children who constantly heard negative messages from their parents or other family members often grew into adults who internally repeated those same messages, Many adults today are fighting thoughts that were planted in them long before they were old enough to even defend themselves. Because environments, those childhood environments, truly matter. Some children grew up in chaotic homes. Some children grew up under constant criticism. Some children grew up receiving love that felt conditional, like they had to perform in order to be accepted. Others grew up never quite feeling like they were good enough. And over time, those experiences begin to shape the internal voice people carry with them right into adulthood. That voice becomes the narrator in their mind. Sometimes encouraging them, but other times condemning them. And the war within the mind does not care whether you come from wealth or from poverty. It only cares about the messages that were planted there. And when those messages go unchecked and unchallenged, many people unknowingly carry that battlefield of the mind with them right into adulthood. Fighting a war within themselves, day in and day out. Another battlefield where people often become their own worst enemy is in the area of emotional warfare. Many people move through life carrying emotions that were never properly processed. These emotions quietly shape their behavior, their decisions, and ultimately their relationships. Resentment is one of the most common character defects. Some people carry grudges for years, sometimes for decades. They replay old offenses in their minds, allowing past wounds to shape how they treat the people in their present lives. Bitterness can also take root, especially after experiences like betrayal, divorce, or deep disappointments. When that pain is never addressed, it can slowly turn into anger towards everyone, even those who had nothing to do with the original hurt. Jealousy and insecurity also grow out of unresolved emotional wounds. A person who never learned how to feel secure within themselves may constantly seek validation, approval, or reassurance from others. And when that attention is not received, frustration and instability often follow. Another issue is emotional impulsiveness. Some individuals react to situations without even pausing to reflect on anything. Words are spoken in anger. Bad decisions are usually made in the heat of the moment. And usually, negative consequences follow. Without emotional discipline, the same conflicts tend to repeat themselves over and over again. There are also those who refuse to listen to any other perspectives or accept any type of correction. When someone believes that they are always right, growth and evolution in that person becomes downright impossible. Healthy relationships require humility, flexibility, reflection, and the willingness to learn. Can we always remain teachable? A lack of accountability is a major emotional trap. When every failure is blamed on other people, circumstances, or the system, A person never examines their own role in the situation or conflict. Without self-reflection, patterns remain unchanged. And over time, people may even surround themselves with others who reinforce the unhealthy behaviors. And instead of seeking guidance or constructive criticism from healthy peers or mentors, they choose environments where their actions are never really challenged. This prevents emotional maturity and keeps destructive cycles alive. And when these patterns go unexamined, people often find themselves repeating the same problems in different situations, the same conflicts, the same relationship struggles, the same frustrations, just with different faces and different bodies. This is why emotional warfare can be so destructive. The person fighting the battle may not even realize that they're fighting it. Because unresolved emotions are like landmines buried inside the soul. Eventually, someone will step on them. And when that happens, the damage rarely stays confined within the individual. Man, it spills over into friendships, families, romantic relationships, and every other connection that they have with others. And until those emotional battles are faced honestly, the war within continues. Another battlefield where people often become their own worst enemy is in the physical realm. This is where the war within begins to show up on the outside. Many people are not defeated by an enemy. They are defeated by their bad habits, substance abuse, gambling, general reckless behavior and bad decision making, neglecting our health, running our bodies into the ground through stress and burnout. Sometimes the body is simply carrying the weight of unresolved trauma, poor coping mechanisms, and internal chaos. Folks, when I wrote that paper in the 3rd grade about what I wanted to be when I grew up, I never said that I wanted to be an addict. No child dreams of that for their future. And when I took that first drink, when I took that first hit, no one sat me down and explained to me where that road would take me. Addiction robbed me of many of my best years. It slowed down and impeded the progress of my goals, my dreams, and my aspirations. It robbed me of the opportunity to become the best version of myself over the course of those years. For a long time, I had become my own worst enemy in this area of my life. I was destroying my temple. I was neglecting my health. Addiction is often described as a mental, physical, and spiritual disease. But many of its most obvious symptoms show up physically. And even when the warning signs appear, many people, call me Exhibit A, still avoid going to the doctor. They avoid getting help and treatment. They avoid confronting the reality of what is happening to their bodies. In many cases, these patterns can also be traced back to childhood. The apple, for me, didn't fall far from the tree. You see, my dad was an alcoholic. And if I look back far enough along the family tree, I'm sure there were others as well. But at some point in my life, I had to face for myself, for me, World War me, an uncomfortable truth. I had to face that the enemy was me. It was me against me. It was World War me. For many people, the physical destruction that we see in our lives is often a symptom of something deeper. Because when a person is at war within themselves physically, it is often connected to a deeper conflict happening spiritually. Which brings us to another battlefield. Spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare plays a powerful role in shaping a person's sense of meaning and moral compass. When a child grows up with clear guidance, strong values, and consistent examples of integrity, it gives them a foundation that they can build their life upon. But when that foundation is unstable and shaky, the negative consequences often follow people right into adulthood. Some people grow up with an absence of guidance and direction. Others grow up seeing hypocrisy in their authority figures. Some experience outright betrayal from people who are supposed to guide and direct them. And many grow up with deep confusion and distortion regarding morals and values, hearing one thing taught, but seeing something completely different lived out. When a child grows up without a stable moral compass, they often spend their entire adulthood searching for one. Folks, I grew up in church culture. I respect church culture. I'll never cast any aspersions on church culture. While I grew up in church culture and while that environment gave me a foundation for things like class, structure, and etiquette, what I mostly learned were religious routines and rules. In turn, I was never really taught how to manage and regulate my emotions. I was never taught how to identify my feelings. I was never taught about healthy coping mechanisms. I was never taught about effective conflict resolution. I read all about the fruits of the Spirit in the Bible. But I rarely saw people around me consistently walking those principles out in their daily lives. So, in many ways, I was exposed to a lot of religious language and biblical teachings. But I received very little practical guidance on how to become the best version and highest vibration of myself. I wasn't taught how to live with emotional balance. I wasn't taught how to operate from a higher level of awareness, intuition, and discernment. And when those deeper lessons are missing, people often spend years of their adult life trying to discover a spiritual foundation that they had never received. Another battlefield where people often become their own worst enemy is in the area of financial warfare. Money habits are rarely formed overnight, folks. In many cases, they are learned early in childhood. Some people grow up in homes filled with financial chaos. Others grow up watching irresponsible spending. Some grow up with a deep fear of financial lack, while others grow up in families where money was simply never discussed at all. These early experiences shape the ways many adults relate to money. Impulsive spending, avoiding financial responsibility, caught up in addictions, amassing large amounts of debt, or constantly living paycheck to paycheck because financial planning was never modeled in the home. Because many people are not fighting money problems. They are fighting the money lessons that they were never taught as children in the home. In my own life, I was never really taught much about financial literacy. Yeah, I heard phrases from my mother and father like save money for a rainy day. But no one ever really sat me down and explained to me the nuances of finances. Like how money works, how to build assets, how to manage liabilities, or how to plan for the future. Instead, I grew up in a culture where people were taught to worship material possessions, the clothes, the jewelry, the cars, the status symbols. Folks, I sense, let me just keep it on me, my sense of self-worth and self-esteem were tied to things that depreciated in value, not things that appreciated in value. So instead of building assets, I know I'm not the only one, many of us ended up collecting liabilities. And it was a sobering realization for me to discover that my entire self-esteem and entire self-worth were tied to possessions. Because when your identity is tied to things, your financial decisions often follow that same mindset. And of course, addiction makes that battle even more costly. Addiction doesn't just rob a person physically, mentally, and spiritually. It often robs them financially as well, no matter what your vice is. So, in closing, thank you for hanging out with me this long. Folks, the world will always have wars. And guess what? In those wars, there will be no real winners, no matter what anyone says or does. So the real question is this: are you finally learning how to win the war within yourself? This is a war that you can actually win. My friends, when we step back and look at these battlefields, the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual, and even the financial, we begin to understand something very important and something very powerful. The war within ourselves does not just affect us. It spills over into every relationship we have, into our families, into our friendships, into our romantic relationships, and into the way that we move throughout the world. Many people spend their entire lives looking outward for the enemy, blaming the ex, blaming their parents, blaming their circumstances, blaming society. But real transformation often begins when we are honest enough to look within. Because when we recognize that the real war is within us, we wave the white flag. But we are surrendering to win this war. We shed our unhealthy behaviors, and it is through this shedding that we are reborn. The moment we challenge those voices that were planted in our heads from childhood, the moment we face the emotions we buried from childhood. The moment we break the habits that were destroying us from childhood. The moment we begin to build the spiritual compass that was not cultivated in our childhood. The moment we take responsibility for how we mishandle our resources from childhood. That is when the war within begins to lose its power. And that is when we truly begin the journey of becoming the best version and highest vibration of ourselves. Because in the end, healthy relationships do not begin with fixing everything and everyone else. They begin with the courage to confront and fix ourselves. And when we begin to win the war within, we finally create the possibility for peace in all of our relationships around us. And perhaps, just perhaps, we will achieve a world of peace instead of a world of war. So, continue being the best version of yourself today, and then doing the work to get even better tomorrow. Feel, deal, heal, protect your peace. Like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment. Thank you so much for watching. This is GBIC, Relationship University, the Relationship Problems channel, where we find relationship solutions and get better together. Be blessed, everyone.